Thank you for joining us, for packing in. You may know him. This is Kevin Spacey. He's won a couple of Oscars. In fact, even some for video games recently. He runs some...
You can't be the only one.
Yeah.
I'm going to post all of these later.
Right.
Sorry.
And Kevin, I'm imagining you're going to want to stop now just to make sure that everybody else can take their picture of you. Is that we're going to do that? We'll do that in a half an hour.
No, I think they should all just stand here like this the entire session, like they're at a rock concert.
Now, I just want to be very clear, but you know all of Kevin's many great achievements. Today we learnt one more, which is that the New York Post, yes, no lesser authority than the New York Post, has designated Kevin the King of Davos. We are in the presence of royalty.
Is there an investitude at some point?
there is. Well, Your Majesty. Let's start with. Can we start with politics? It's a big political year. You've had some experience recently in the world of political drama. What would Frank Underwood's advice be to the Republican Democratic candidates for the presidency?
Well, in the first place, I think that Donald Trump, that Frank Underwood. You see, he even stole my time just now without doing anything. I think that Frank Underwood would look at this particular year and find it as amusing as I do. The good thing is, look, I think at the end of the day, the United States has time and time again, despite sometimes where we think, wow, they're really crazy, like there's some crazy shit going down. We generally get it right eventually. And I think we'll probably get it right in the end. It's been interesting to also observe campaign tactics that are not new. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of people are talking about, oh, this is all brand new. We've never seen this before. A candidate who attacks the media and says all these rather insulting things to lots and lots of groups of people and uses fear. But actually, you just have to go back to George Wallace in 1968. It's exactly the campaign he ran. I mean, exactly the campaign he ran. So we've been through this before. I think the discourse is not particularly enlightening and a bit depressing. If you care about politics and you care about the notion that people can come together and really accomplish amazing things. I think it's what we witness here at Davos.
But did House of Cards change your view of politics and politicians?
No. I've been interested because I've been sort of involved in politics my whole life. I started stuffing envelopes when I was in junior high and high school. I worked for Senator Ted Kennedy when he ran for president in 1980, for John Anderson when he ran in 1980 as independent, and then I had the good fortune of meeting President Clinton while he was a governor in Arkansas. And I've been around a lot of politics. And what I love about House of Cards is that I've talked to politicians who will say, on the one hand, some will say, well, it's completely fictional, your show. It's not like that at all. And then others who will say to me, oh, it's closer to the truth than anyone would like to know. But I also think, look, it's not just politics. You're at the BBC, right? I'm sure there's a degree of Underwoodianness there. Or in the electric company, or in the car business. You know, there's always about who's on top, who's on bottom, who decides, who's in power. It's not, I don't think it's any different in most businesses.
We want to talk this afternoon a bit about storytelling, but can we start with your story and acting? How did you get into acting?
Well, I think my mother would say I knew coming out. That, in fact, my mother had me in the hallway on the way to the delivery room. She said, you made a very early entrance. But I think somewhere around the age of 8, I knew I wanted to be an actor. And part of that was because of my mother. She introduced me to the theater, to arts, to great books, to great music. I grew up in a house where there was a lot of culture surrounding my world, and I got taken to the theater, and I got taken to, we used to go to this great old movie theater called the New Art in Santa Monica, and I used to see great black and white movies, and so I was introduced very early on to Jimmy Stewart and Humphrey Bogart and Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, and I just believed who they were. Nothing about them as people, just I believed their characters. And that's how I ended up starting doing impressions, because I discovered that if I could learn how to do a Jimmy Stewart impression, I could make my mother laugh. And that was the greatest sound I ever heard. Because my mother worked very hard. She was the breadwinner in our family, and so she didn't have it easy. But I could just say, well, what I do is I put famous people in odd circumstances. Jimmy Stewart at the laundromat. I've run out of quarters. And my mother would laugh. Or I'd do Cary Grant or Jimmy Cagney. And so I kind of knew there was this dream of wanting to be an actor when I was very, very young. And then it really started for me when I was in junior high school, and I had a guidance counselor who suggested that I had perhaps an excessive amount of energy. And so she recommended that I take a couple of elective courses. So I took woodshop and drama. And I can tell you the moment I did the very first thing in drama class, where we had to do a pantomime to music. And I created a Western scene where I was riding a horse. I had a 6-gun, and it was to the music from dueling banjos. So it was the ride got faster and faster as I went. And everybody applauded and laughed. And I was like, well, that's a sound I like. And then the drama teacher there, who was really remarkable and a great mentor, then led me toward a workshop that was being run by one of my idols, which was Jack Lemmon. I mean, his work in Some Like It Hot or The Apartment or The Odd Couple is some of the finest work I'd ever seen. He just did comedy and drama brilliantly. He was a kind of everyman. So he was running this workshop at the Mark Taper Forum in 1974, and I got a chance to go, and one of the things we had to do was we had to do scenes. And Mr. Lemmon was going to critique our scenes. And so I did a scene. And, you know, I was very shy. I was very nervous. And he came up to me after I did my scene. He put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "That was terrific." He said, "No, I'm not kidding. What's your name?" I said, "Kevin." He said, "This young actor has been doing what I've been talking about all afternoon. You was connected to the material. I'm telling you this. You should go to New York, and you should study to be an actor, because this is what you were meant to do with your life." And I was 13 years old. And it is kind of extraordinary that sometimes in life, a teacher, a parent, an adult, a mentor can say just the right words to a young person at just the right moment, and it can be life-changing. And it was life-changing for me, because I did go to New York. I did study at Juilliard for 2 years, and then I began my career as an actor in the theater in New York. And then 12 years later, after we had met in 1974, I found out that Jack Lemmon was coming to Broadway to do a production of Eugene O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night. And I felt at 26, I was the right age to play one of his sons. And I particularly wanted to play the role of the alcoholic Jamie Tyrone. So I tried to get an audition. I couldn't get an audition. I finally had to sort of sneak my way in. And I finally got an audition with Jonathan Miller, who was going to direct the production, the great British director. And then I had to audition with Jack. And so once again, after we had met 12 years before, I found myself in a room with Jack Lemmon doing a scene, or we did like 4 scenes together, and I was relentless with him. I mean, I'd prepared for this audition unlike anything I'd ever prepared for. I was toppling over his lines. I was pushing him. I wanted this part so bad. And at the end of it, Jack Lemmon once again walked up to me, put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "That was a touch of terrific." He goes, "You know what? I never thought we'd find the rotten kid, but you're it. Jesus Christ, what the hell was that?" And I won the role. And I got to spend the next year of my life working on stage with my idol. And he then became the greatest mentor I could have hoped to have had. a father figure, and really somebody who was such an extraordinary example of a man who had reached absolute the heights in his profession, but it never went to his head. He was the sweetest man, and we then ended up doing 3 films together, ending with Glengarry Glen Ross, which he used to love to call Gene Barry Glenn Close. It's easier to say. And you know, there's really not a day that goes by where the influence he had, the lessons he, just by example that he taught. I've always sort of gone through my life feeling like if I just keep a little twist of lemon in my heart, then I'm going to be okay.
And let's talk a bit about that point you make about finding a way to touch someone's life at just the right time. You gave a speech a few weeks back about storytelling and the business of storytelling, not necessarily if you work in the stage or in film. How do you think about storytelling and enabling any person, any organization to tell a story?
Well, we all are in the business of storytelling. I mean, it's not just exclusive for people like me who are in the entertainment business. I think that no matter what business you're in, no matter what you're selling or doing, why is it certain businesses can hover above their competition? I mean, is Starbucks really serving the best cup of coffee? Maybe not. I mean, I like a caramel macchiato myself, but is American Express really the best return rate on a credit card? Probably not. But it's the story they managed to tell. And I think that the more that we think about that, the more that we, you know, sometimes we see commercials and we see stuff and we just go, it's, you know, it's a turnoff. But somehow those people that manage to tell a story, that manage to even temporarily move us in a certain way, that we remember. We don't feel like we're being sold. We feel like we're being told something that we can connect to. So I've always been driven by that very idea, that very notion.
And is it changing storytelling? I mean, you know, people think in the age of Twitter and Instagram, things are much more compressed. And yet, if you look at what you've done on Netflix, if you look at what happened at the Old Vic, a lot of the projects you took on were about long form storytelling. Why?
Well, because A, I believe audiences are really intelligent, so I start with that. I don't start thinking that they're really stupid. There are some who do.
I thought you were going to say there were some who are, but
not in Davos. And I also believe that audiences have remarkable attention spans. You know, there's always this sort of argument. You sometimes see it in the way movies are cut, where there's a cut every 3 seconds because, God forbid, something isn't happening on screen, something isn't distracting. But if you go back and look at the great movies, there's just a camera capturing people in a space. That is compelling. And I believe audiences actually, at the end of the day, they don't care about platforms. They don't care that it's on Netflix or on Instagram or a 6-second Vine or a 13-hour miniseries on PBS. They want good stories. If we give them great content, not just to fill the time, but great content that are great stories, they will watch it on whatever platform it's on.
But there is something different in a story, a complexity that's possible, obviously, with time. And do you think that there is, if you like, a swing back against short, snappier, bite-sized pieces of content to something that is much more textured?
No, I actually think there's room for all of it. And I think that that's why we're seeing so many different kinds of platforms emerge. You know, people are adapting storytelling for the platform that they're on. And that's actually kind of exciting and opening up new doors.
But I guess there's a question about the choices you've made that people have sometimes thought are quite contrary. You know, the Oscar-winning actor takes over London theatre that's a little down on its luck.
Fucking out of my mind.
I went for contrary, but I think that's probably...
No, fucking out of my mind, yeah.
Now, some people, Kevin, would say, now you've done that, the world of technology is galloping ahead, and now you've just become chairman of a movie studio, Relativity. There are some people who've used, I think, the same words about that.
Yeah.
Why a movie studio?
Because I'll get to make films. Because for the first time in my entire career, I'll be on the other side of the table. You know, I've spent my life making movies and producing films, but it's always been in that position where we're trying to convince a committee of executives at a studio that this is the writer you should hire. No, they don't want to hire that writer. They want to hire someone else. And then you go through 6 months of rewrites, and then the movie doesn't get made. And then finally, you know, a year later, they'll hire the writer you wanted to hire in the first place. And then finally you get back to that, and then maybe you'll get the movie made. But now we're in a position where my producing partner, Dana Bernetti, and I are going to be able to go hire that writer, hire that director. Let's put that actor in this. Let's make this movie. And we also believe that there's a kind of wheelhouse that we've had success in. Films that are produced for 20, 30, 40 million, under $50 million budgets. The studios have abandoned those films. But I think there's a big reason why most of the great filmmakers, directors, writers, actors have gone to television. Because the ground is very fertile for character-driven dramas that don't cost $180 million to do. So I believe there's a vacuum in the film industry of filmmakers who want to make movies that are character-driven drama, that are budgets under 50, and we want to say, come to Relativity. We're very interested in giving audiences those kind of stories. And the fact that we had such success in producing The Social Network, or Captain Phillips, or 21, in which the return on those films to Sony compared to the budget was higher than I think any film they did in those years. Our return was bigger. So that's a sort of niche that we think at this moment in time is a really great way to take on the responsibilities of running a studio.
And out of interest, is that what you look for when you look at a project? Is it first and foremost character, not necessarily plot or hijinks or techno excitements? It's character that it's the thing that defines.
By the way, techno excitement is, I think, a new category you've just invented.
Maybe. Techno excitement sounds.
What kind of a movie is it? It's techno excitement.
It's a mix.
Greenlight that film.
Yeah. They'll have a totally different studio. That's a different part of the world for that. But it's character, is it?
Look, I've always been somebody who I read a story. I mean, in fact, I used to drive my agents crazy because, you know, they always like it. You get to a point where you start making they make an offer to you. And, you know, it's very like, well, they made an offer. And then you get the script, and there's, oh, they've offered you the role of Charles. And you're like, ooh, Charles. When does Charles come into this fucking movie? Oh, there's Charles. And then you sort of get your hands on it. And I got to a point where I was like, you know what? I don't want to know the character anymore. I don't want to know the role they want me to look at. I want to read a story. And if I'm moved by the story, if I feel the story is worth telling, then either the role will become obvious as I read it, or I will make the remarkably embarrassing phone call, which I've done many times, call my agent, I go, oh my God, the script is so extraordinary. And the role of Charlie is incredible. And they go, no. Tom Hanks is playing Charlie. It's the brother, friend of to read it again. But it allows me to get back to that point that I used to just read material. I used to read plays in high school and go, this is a beautiful play. God, I'd love to play that role. So I like the innocence of that. I don't like the who's directing, how much money you had to buy, all the stuff that just gets in the way of being able to judge something honestly on the page.
Let's discuss the new exciting industry of techno excitement for a minute then. I think we're onto something really big here.
We are.
Technology and storytelling, right? Virtual reality. I guess there's a lot of interest in it, and people are not yet landing storytelling that entirely works in virtual reality. How do you foresee it? How do you foresee people using it? When and where will they use it? What kind of stories will emerge with it? Are you a believer?
I am a believer. I've been very fortunate to be able to go and see right up till very recently where it all is. And I think it's going to be revolutionary. For a whole lot of reasons. First of all, let's just think about sports, all right? Football fans here? Yes. Soccer fans?
Yeah, Patriots.
Patriots? All right, now you've taken it too far. See? I knew that was going to happen. Imagine that you can buy a ticket to be on the sidelines of a live football match while it's happening and be able to go, oh my God, that's going to happen. There's no doubt. Or concert, that's going to happen. You know, Paul McCartney did a VR thing last year. Beck did one. Quite remarkable. You're so close to the stage, you literally feel you're there. I think it will end up being the natural home for capturing the living theater. Because finally we can take a three-dimensional experience and retain it as a three-dimensional experience. And I think that it will work in film. Maybe not an entire film, but I think we should try. Let's see if there are 5 sequences in a movie where that device, whatever it's going to be, and I don't think it's going to be this forever. You know, I mean, this reminds me of the first cell phones where we were like, yes, can you hear me? I think it's going to be quite simple, much simpler as time goes by. But I also think of it in terms of education. I mean, the classroom is probably the single space that we all know that has not changed at all since the beginning of time. It's a chalkboard and seats and a teacher up front. But imagine if we can bring the best teachers in the world into that classroom. And a child can put on a headset and suddenly be at the bottom of the ocean studying science, or be in the Globe Theatre watching actors rehearsing in the 16th century, or being in the Sydney Opera House while a concert's happening. And I also think that in the same way that I've always felt that the acting profession is a really humanizing profession, I'm forced by the very nature of my job to step into someone else's shoes, to wander around in someone else's ideas, to think differently. And it's that much harder not to have empathy for other people and their circumstances that are very different from your own. And imagine, I think Chris Milk, who's one of the great VR pioneers, has said that he believes that VR is going to be an extraordinary empathy machine. To be able to allow someone to actually go somewhere and be somewhere that they may never have a chance to visit, and see what someone's circumstances are that are completely different from their own.
The only question I'd ask about that is, people, I guess, would have said the same thing about television. Their hope was that television would have the power to provide cultural education.
It does. You don't think it does? Now look, it's easy to knock television because there's so much of it. But television has been one of the most remarkable places where people have learned about other lives, and where we've been exposed to culture and music and entertainment and argument and debate. Television is a great instrument of that.
But how do you ensure that that technology has that capacity, that edifying capacity you describe? Because it's a tension, you know, I know in the world I live in, and you do too, there's a tension between entertainment and that cultural, artistic endeavor. How's that going to happen?
You have to have the right people in charge. It's the decision makers. You know, if what you want to do is just fill up the time, if what you want to do is have a 24-hour news channel that just repeats the same story every 6 minutes, instead of taking your time saying, hey, what if we did it? Let's go off the air. There's nothing to report. We're back with breaking news, and it's the same news we were breaking from 6 o'clock this morning.
Just so you know,
there's nothing to report. So why not say, hey, let's do 2 hours on cancer. Let's do 2 hours on the education system. Let's do 2 hours on something that matters that people don't know enough about. That's, for me, a more interesting use of the airwaves than just repeating it again and again and again for ratings. You know, Edward R. Murrow said it in 1964. When the news division is put in a situation where it has to compete with entertainment, it is no longer news. And that is true. So I think there are lots of ways in which we can make sure that all of these new technologies do have that level. It doesn't mean that we can't be entertained, and you know, I love, you know, I can take a good hour and a half of completely mindless drivel. That's fine. I enjoy, you know. You'd be surprised at some of the movies I think are fantastic movies.
Come on.
Super Troopers, come on. It's a great film.
What is your greatest film of all time, by the way?
What?
What's your best film, favorite film of all time?
That I've made?
No, I was going to say that anyone, the one that you like
anyone's
the most,
made.
yes.
And that you've made.
Yeah, and that you've made.
Well, I hope I haven't made it yet. That's my answer to that. I hope it's ahead of me and not behind me. But, you know, Dr. Strangelove, it still holds up. It's everything a movie should be.
Well, okay, that's interesting. So, eccentric decisions.
Gentlemen, there is no fighting in the war room. I want to tell you a story, though, actually. Because you talked earlier a little bit about this notion of being able to affect somebody's life or say something or recognize that a nickel drops in someone. I do a lot of workshops, and I did a workshop in Abu Dhabi. And I had done a workshop previously in Doha. And as I got closer and closer to the workshop, I was told by the organizers, yes, no, people are signing up and it's going very well, but don't expect any women. And I said, why? And they said, well, it's really not, it's not what is expected of women, to go into the arts or be an actress. It's really not, it's not appropriate. People really look to science and law. And I was like, okay. So they kept saying it over and over. And then I got to Doha and I walked into this classroom, and out of 28, there were 13 women. And I looked at the organizer. And then they asked me a couple weeks later, would you do another workshop in Abu Dhabi? And I said, yes, under one condition. And they said, what? And I said, the entire class has to be women. So that happened. And there were two sets of women from two sets of universities, one slightly more religious than the other. They all were wearing burqas, some, not all, many of them. And like me being that shy kid in the back of the workshop with Jack Lemmon, I'm always looking for the shy one in the corner. And there was this girl who was over there with her friend. Her friend had gotten up, and they were doing scenes. They had prepared scenes from Shakespeare, and they were doing it in Arabic, and it was so interesting, and it was moving, and it was wild. But I kept seeing this girl who was like, you could tell that she wanted to be a part of it, but she was really terrified and nervous. And so we took a break, and when we came back, I was like, all right, who's going to get up next? Who's going to get up next? What about you? And she went, and I said, why? And she went, I don't know any Shakespeare. And I said, well, it doesn't have to be Shakespeare. And she said, what do you, it doesn't have to be Shakespeare? I said, no, not at all, you can do anything you want. She went, oh, I was told it had to be Shakespeare. I said, no, I don't know who told you that. So then she said, well, I said, do you know anything? And she said, well, I might know something from fried green tomatoes. And I thought, wow. So I asked her if she'd get up. And she got up and she did this monologue, and it was pretty perfunctory, and she was very awkward, and she was quite aware of us, but I was listening to the content. And the content was quite powerful. So when she finished, I sat her down and I said, can you tell us what is going on in this scene? What is this woman grappling with? What is she dealing with? And she said, well, she's in a relationship with a man who abuses her, and she's afraid that he's going to start to abuse the child. I said, that's pretty powerful stuff. I said, I want you to do it again, only this time, don't think about us, don't think about performing it, don't think about anything. Just try as best you can to connect to the story and to share your feelings. I said, you don't have to move, just sit right where you are, just do it again. So she did it again. And something started to happen where she just started to tell the story. And there was a line that she had that she'd only said once the first time she did it, but this time she said it 5 times. And each time she said it, she hit her fist. And she said, and every time he beat me, I thought of God. And every time he beat me, I thought of God. And then tears flew out of her eyes. I felt the whole room go. And it was an extraordinary moment. And when we got to the end, she stayed there, and I asked her, we can all tell you why that was different for us. Can you tell us why it was different for you? And she said something that said everything about what's wrong in this region in the world. She said, when you asked me to share my feelings, this is something I'm never asked. And I got a letter from her about 9 months later that she's trying to get to London to study to be an actress. And that makes everything worthwhile. You know, that kind of moment in a workshop where, and by the way, it's not even about whether kids want to go into the arts. You know, I have my own foundation now precisely because of what Jack Lemmon taught me, which was that he had this wonderful philosophy that if you've done well in the business you wanted to do well in, then it's your obligation to spend a good portion of your time sending the elevator back down. And I always thought that was a great term. But it's also about what the tools of theater and arts and culture, as well as the artists, can do for a kid who has no self-esteem, for somebody who has never collaborated before, for somebody who's never stood up for themselves. I think all of those things, all of those kind of experiences for somebody who was in the back of the classroom and shy and terrified, having some kind of identity crisis, who suddenly through a poetry project or a theater workshop finds a way to express themselves, finds a way to stand up. That's better for all of us. Because, we've all been in circumstances where we wish the person we were dealing with had somewhere along the line learned to communicate a little bit fucking better.
Kevin, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you all feel as fortunate as I do to have been here. Connect with the story, share your feelings. Thank you for doing and making that possible for us. Kevin Spacey.